Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Data Dialogues from the Data Vault Innovators community. I'm Julien Redmond, CEO of Ignition and Iris, and I have with me today two very esteemed colleagues. I'll get you guys to introduce yourselves. So, Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Julie. Yes, my name's Steve Rose. I'm the practice manager at Ignition.
And Richard?
Richard Harris. I'm the account director for Ignition.
Excellent. So the topic for today is dealing with the HiPPO in the room. I guess a discussion about data maturity. So while you might be watching this on the DVIC, we'd just like to mention too that we now have a YouTube channel. So if you search for Data Vault Innovators Community on YouTube, you'll be able to find a lot of this content there as well. So a bit of an effort to make sure that it's accessible to all those who are looking for content around Data Vault. But let's jump into it, guys. Richard, I assume we're not talking about big animals in Africa. What the hell is a HiPPO?
HiPPO is an acronym, highest paid person's opinion. And it's used generally because, quite often we find that, it's a double-edged sword. Usually an exercise in improving data maturity or getting a handle on use of data in an organization does require some form of executive sponsorship. But the other side of that blade is that quite often the people who are having to make the decisions are not necessarily very mature in their own understanding of what data can and cannot do. And that's really what we're trying to deal with our data maturity assessment, is to understand where is the business at right now, where from a business objective standpoint, and this is obviously where the HiPPO's opinion really does matter, do they want to be, but then how can we get there in the context of that organization's capabilities, both in terms of technology, budget, and skill set.
Okay, so highest paid person, I guess that probably means some executive who may be far more of a generalist or a business specialist than a data specialist. Steve, you lead a lot of these types of engagements for us. Do we see that being a big problem for us? And how do we deal with making sure we're basing decisions on real evidence and good practice rather than just allowing that opinion to drive the decisions?
That's a good question, and I'll try to answer that as concisely as I can. But data maturity is exceptionally broad, and it isn't just a technology-driven initiative. It is a business-driven initiative, and it does involve people, processes, and technology. Highest paid opinion. I guess, how do you counter it and how do you manage it? I guess it's by sort of looking at what is the organization actually trying to achieve by having good data maturity. We think about being, having evidence-based decision-making operationally, strategically, meeting strategic goals, achieving a certain agility in an organization, being able to pivot from, one sort of strategic element to another, and all of these things require data and effective processes for leveraging and operating on data. So I guess how we've done it in generally is that you try to talk to those outcomes first. So a HiPPO might have, we need to do it this way, we need to do it that way because of this system, because of that system. It's always good to bring it up a level to the strategy. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And then let's try to break that down. What are the outcomes that we're looking for? How are we going to achieve those outcomes? And quite often, when you show the bigger picture and how you're sort of zoning in specific areas, the most obvious solution or the best solution does appear to be, the most obvious one, which might actually differ. And that's how you can generally turn opinions around and turn a HiPPO from being an adversary to being an advocate.
Well, I think, obviously, we usually have, when we go into these, quite a lot of executive sponsorship because there is a real desire to improve, the use of information. There's, lots of those, data is the new oil type memes and what have you out there, and I think it's really made it into the consciousness of a lot of executives that handling information the right way, making sure that's in the hands of the right users and those sorts of things is a powerful thing for their business. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the process we go through when we are doing a maturity assessment or helping someone develop a data strategy. And Richard, for you, that'd start with the very initial discussions, I suspect, with some of the executive. What are the common topics we see that are driving people to want to assess their data maturity?
It's actually been an interesting journey over the last decade or so in the data industry. There was a time when the approach would be, I think using data would give us a competitive advantage, that we can, leapfrog our competition, offer a better experience to our customers, and maybe lower some costs. These days, the conversation has almost gone 180 degrees, and it's now that if we don't do something and do it fast, we're going to lose to our competitors. The maturity of the market in terms of the consumers and their expectations of what's possible and what should and should not be expected at customer service levels, it's kind of outstripped a lot of organizations' capabilities. And so we now see a lot of these traditional organizations who are scrabbling to sort of keep up and realize, okay, we've built something, maybe 5-10 years ago, we've got ourselves a data warehouse, but the reporting is very siloed or centralized in a key area. And I don't have a body of staff who are really enabled to use that data. And so that's where a lot of the conversations start, is how do I know where I want to be. And look, I should also say that one of the things that often happens is the technology vendors focus on that executive level, and they'll promise everything under the sun. Our algorithm will tell you exactly where your customer churn is going to come from, but they don't talk about the need to have accurate and trusted data that algorithm can monitor in order to derive that insight. And so quite often we have people coming saying, I want to get into machine learning, I wanted to get into AI, but they're still using Excel spreadsheets across the organization to produce their board reporting. And so there's a big gap between those two things. And really that's where people start with, I know where I want to be, I know what I'm told is possible, I have no idea how to get there. And usually, while there might be people inside the organization that have a point of view, quite often those point of views can be conflicting. So having an independent third party come in at that higher level and say, okay, given the literally thousands of man hours we've put into building data management solutions in the past, we're pretty well placed to help you tease out, and I mentioned this at the start, what can you do within the context of your organization? What is that path of least resistance that's going to get you those quick wins that can set you on the path where you want to be?
Well, Steve, I guess if you look at it from that perspective, there's, at a high level, there is a strategy for growth or cost reduction, other key strategies for an organization, and the realization that analytics and data management is going to help organizations achieve that. You come down a level, there's lots of dimensions to it as well. Like I'm thinking security and data quality and those sort of things. What are the kind of the critical dimensions that get looked at when we go into a maturity assessment?
Oh, look, it's a good question. Sort of keeping it high level without going too detailed. I mean, we do look at some of the certainly data governance, data quality, making sure that we've got appropriate business glossary, definitions, and so forth. We look at the infrastructure, and that includes the data ops component as well, how data is moving around the organization, what are the principles by which it's stored, how is its life cycle managed, so on and so forth. We look at the data management practices around retention and access, third-party access, and how PII is looked upon, and those sorts of things. And then we look at ultimately the maturity of the capability that the business is seeking to achieve, which is to become more of a data-driven business. Where are they at from a capability perspective? Where do they need to be? Rich has already mentioned that, Excel spreadsheets tend to be quite prevalent in a lot of organisations. But Excel spreadsheets on their own are not necessarily a bad thing, but it's generally the processes that wrap around those. Someone will open up that spreadsheet, they will perform a number of operations. Largely those operations are undocumented. Nobody knows that they're done. It's an opportunity for quality, it's problems, it's an opportunity for access problems. And that can be quite a long thread to unravel in an organisation, but it's necessary to be able to also evaluate all the risks that an organisation carries in terms of how it manages and handles data. So we try to look at all of those sorts of aspects, and we will come up with a maturity rating for where you are, and also propose where we think you should be for your sort of organisation, your size, and that sort of stuff. And so that gives you where you are and a target, and then the only thing that's left from that is what's that gap? And if we were to take that gap and break it down into what are the initiatives that we need to be able to do, prioritize, and so on and so forth, on a reasonable roadmap that the business has an appetite for, and then that becomes the program of work to get you from where you are to where you need to be.
If I can just add to that as well, one of the things that we're seeing in a couple of current projects that is coming further and further up the priority is how we communicate that strategy to the business, downstream users, managers, the people who actually have to use the data, because quite often it's that they're not aware of what's possible with the information. So in addition to getting the right architecture and data management practices in place to allow an organization to use that data, we then have to say to the organization, well, this is what this team can do for you. We can help you with process automation. We can give you better insight upon which to make your decisions. And more we can enable the people downstream to access the information and, play with it themselves in order to enhance, their own decision making. And really that's the heart of a mature organization. It's putting the information into the hands of those that can really use it as part of their day-to-day function and improve what they do. And that's a very big part of that first stage of understanding, where do you want to be? Because a lot of the individuals out there want to do more. They want to be able to be better at their jobs, and helping them understand what can be done is a critical component now of the outputs from the work that we do.
So that's very interesting. So thinking this through, I guess, you've both mentioned managing risk, and so there is, and Steve, you mentioned, the technology vendors, obviously, or technology and architecture, and Richard mentioned some of the messaging that they might be getting from vendors. So it's a good thing to do before you just decide to leap onto a particular vendor's technology that is promising the world, I guess, and helping you understand if it's fit for purpose, whether it's going to introduce additional risk or technical debt. We've talked about people and the training and enablement to develop the skills. What about the long term, like having a good data maturity and developing skills and knowledge within your organization and then keeping it ongoing? Is that an aspect as well, Steve?
Yes, absolutely. There's a couple of threads there you touched on. One was around architecture. When organisations are making choices on technology to solve particular problems, and you're right, it is becoming increasingly difficult for a lot of organisations to make the right decision, mainly because there's a lot of choice, and because software vendors tend to promise the world. It does all these things, and I think, in my opinion, and based on my experience, I think one of the things that is lacking across many organisations is that linkage between enterprise architecture and a particular solution. We tend not to ask the right questions when it comes to data. How would we access the data? How would we integrate that system into our data architecture? How do we get data out of it? How do we push data into it? How do we manage access centrally? There's a lot of those sorts of questions that are not really answered. And you tend to find, particularly in large organizations, you'll have a lot of intermediate steps where someone will manually pull some data out of one system, munge it in some way, and then push it into another system. Now, in doing that, you're actually creating a third system. It's a third system that's engineered, it's in-house, it's bespoke, it's undocumented, and it represents a whole bunch of risk. So I think organizations would be well placed to understand what is their architecture, and their architecture needs to support a good data architecture. So we talk about integrations from one system to another. Is it secure? Who has access to it? How is the data stored when it's at rest? Is it protected? All those sorts of things. So enterprise architecture plays a big role in enabling all of those data maturity outcomes. And when organizations go and get a system, quite often that system might be a bit of a square peg round hole type scenario from a data architecture. The other thing that you touched on there was more around creating more of a data aware sort of culture within an organization. I think there's no secret that people are probably the biggest risk when it comes to an organization's data. And with the capabilities that we have with our systems today, it's all too easy to do the wrong thing. So, having to, it is a bit of an effort, and there are, data security awareness programs and various other things and compliance programs that organizations have implemented. But I guess in that instance, it kind of starts from the top. You need a good data governance committee. You need good executive buy-in, board buy-in. It needs to be something that has a very high profile. Organizations should have data stewards identified that actually wear hats of accountability for specific areas in the data architecture and how the organization should look and treat their data. That's important for it to be in place. And through that, you can start to have an organization that has a culture of valuing its data assets, and being more aware of the risks of data and be able to manage them appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that a mature architecture, a mature set of processes, and well-trained staff are going to help you address a lot of these issues. Rich, there's an aspect of this that I know is very close to home for you, is the security and privacy aspects, the compliance and regulatory environment that is developing, and the things like brand risk and those sorts of things. So how does this help organizations address that and help executives to maybe avoid exposure to some of those regulations?
Sure. So we adopt an approach that kind of tries to balance the protect and promote of data. Where possible, we want to protect the use of data where it's not necessary to access it. And for this audience, of course, Data Vault is exceptional at being able to organize the data into silos that you can very tightly control over who has access to it and for what purpose. But that also then comes into the data governance, making sure that all your information is contained within a catalog, that you understand, where it comes from, how it can be used, how it's been transformed, and so on and so forth. So having a very strong culture of an understanding of how important data is and how well and how it should be used is kind of critical to that, because the vast majority of data problems, data breaches and the like, really stem from human error. People, not changing their passwords, or accidentally revealing something, or phishing expeditions, or just out and outright poor architecture. Time and time again, we've seen breaches where very valuable information has been made, public through APIs or just embedded as part of a website because some architect decided it was quicker to do it that way, and they had a deadline to meet. So I think that's important. But you also touched on the skills aspect, because it is one of those areas that I think is something that a lot of organizations kind of gloss over. And that is, if we're going to have a data mature organization, we need to allow our staff to invest in their own professional development. I think a lot of companies feel that when they hire people, they should just come with all of this embedded knowledge. But the reality is that universities will never be able to keep up with the rapid pace of change in our industry. So people coming into the workforce, having graduated, are likely going to be behind a little bit in terms of what is on the best practice. And people who've been with your organization 5, 10 years, they know your culture, they know your systems, they know your products. They can't be expected to know everything overnight. So I think investing in that skills development, it really is incumbent upon the organizations and should be part of a data maturity process, making sure that staff are given the time and money where it's necessary to go and develop their understanding of how data can be used, get the right skills in place so they can exploit that. Is a far better return on your investment than trying to go out and hire people, because as we know, there is a very significant skill shortage in our market. The demand for people who have a good working knowledge of data and can use it has far outstripped the supply. COVID has made that even worse. So the only way organizations, I think, can really make sure that they are successful in their data maturity is not only to invest in the technology and the architecture and processes and so forth, but to enable their own staff to develop the skills and confidence to use that data effectively, and therefore to make sure that they're valuing it as the asset that data should be.
Yeah, well, look, I'm convinced if you're watching this and you're not yet convinced that you should at least assess your data maturity, then time to log off. But if you're still here, Steve, let's have a quick chat about how a maturity assessment works, from like a kickoff workshop to delivering a final report and and then engaging the execs. What's the actual kind of high level process we go through when we do that?
Great. Thank you. Good question. So we have 5 phases that of a project that we have. So we have a discovery phase. So that's where we will have multiple interviews with various stakeholders at various different levels across the organisation. We'll be looking at, document artifacts, deep diving into some technical aspects, but also, working with senior leaders to understand where certain data maturity aspects are at, such as data governance, things like that.
Yep.
We will then do some analysis where we'll have, this is the next phase, where we'll bring all that information together and start strategizing as to, okay, where do we think you are on a capability perspective? And we do have our own proprietary framework that we've developed around that. And then from that, we go into the next phase where we start drafting the reports. Now, when we draft the recommendation, it might be necessary to still, engage and talk to various stakeholders if there's any gaps that are remaining. Once we've done that, we then socialise that. The report typically comes with two deliverables. So one is a more detailed report that also contains a roadmap and gap analysis and so on, and then another one which is more of an executive slide deck. So that way, we can sort of communicate up as well as communicate down, and we will meet with the relevant teams, and we'll be able to share that, get some input. If we need to fold that input, make any adjustments, we'll do that, and then we basically finalise. We just have one final closeout session where we'll present the final reports, and then that's it. Case closed.
Excellent. Sounds simple. Let's do one. So obviously we've done a few of these. Richard, what's the steps? What's the time frame if people are interested in reaching out and getting a bit of info about how long it takes, etc.?
Well, give us a call. Would probably be the first port of call. We have a brochure available on our website, but there's nothing better than talking to Steve and I directly. We're happy to jump on a call, try and understand really what the client's timeframes and objectives are. In terms of the lead time, generally 4 to 6 weeks, we've got that kind of line of sight to start those discovery phases, and really from there it's down to working with the client. Quite often there are time constraints involved, so we've got to present a board paper by this date, or we're working up to our budget cycle. So of course there are some peaks and troughs. So if this is something you are thinking about, I would suggest getting it done sooner rather than later is not a bad thing. They can always be refreshed and checked in with at a later date. But certainly starting off with a conversation, with Steve and I, where really the aim will be to see whether our maturity assessment process is going to be the right fit for you, and really hone in on what are those key deliverables that you're going to need, because not everybody is exactly the same, in terms of making sure that the right people see the results of the maturity assessment, and it's again done in a context that makes sense to them, because finance people are different to IT people, that are different to operations people, so there might be a different flavor of the information depending upon who the audience is ultimately going to be.
Excellent. Thanks, gents. I really appreciate the chat. Obviously, it's been a bit of a shameless plug about our maturity assessment, but if any advice for anyone would be to get someone to help you do a maturity assessment, and just assess where your gaps are. It's very important that you obviously manage your data in the right way. So obviously, thanks for watching another episode on the Data Vault Innovators community. A little bit about the platform. We really want you all to get engaged. We've actually just added a whole series of hashtags to make it easy to find some of the older content that's on the platform as well. So under the search function, you can go and have a look at the new hashtags, and that'll sort all of the feed by a range of different things, by podcast or by presenter and those sorts of things. So check that out, and check out some of the previous posts that might have some information that you haven't yet seen. And get online and have a chat in the forums as well. Thanks for joining today, guys. Appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.